7 o'clock. I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's June 28th, 2021.
You got it.
The
It's there.
meeting is in the Aldermatic chamber with Zoom connection possible. And that link can be found on the agenda. Okay, would the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Ernest Jette,
Here.
Alderman Jan Schmidt,
I am here.
Alderman-at-Large Shoshanna Kelly,
I'm here.
Alderman-at-Large Michael O'Brien Sr. is present. Alderman-at-Large Laurie Wilshire,
Here.
and Alderman-at-Large Ben Clemens, and our chairman, Alderman Richard A. Dowd.
Present. We have a quorum. Okay, also in attendance are the mayor, John Griffin, and Treasurer Fredette. Okay. All right, this is the budget wrap-up session. We've heard all the departments come in and give their overviews and presentations. So I just want to go over a few of the rules for the budget wrap-up. Only a budget committee member can make a motion. Other aldermen can make a motion through a budget committee member. So this is the wrap-up for the budget, and we will be taking potentially motions. The motion should be clear, concise, and reference page number, department, and line item or bottom line. So it should be clear as to whether it's an add to the budget, a transfer, or a reduction to the budget. So given that, the first item of business is communications.
There are none.
Okay. Before the communication, I had public comment. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on anything being addressed in the Budget Committee this evening? I see and hear no one, so we'll move on. This is the wrap-up session. And Alderman O'Brien, would you like to make a motion to take R 21-142 from the table?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to take from the table R-21-142, which is this current year's pending municipal budget by roll call.
I don't think it needs to be by roll call. We're all here.
Okay?
So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And R 21-142 is on the table. Okay. All right. Is there anyone that would like to give an overview before we get started on anything?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mayor?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, I'm here to answer any questions that anybody might have, but I would like to give a brief overview, at least of my thinking on the budget. As we've discussed, and we had a public hearing on this just a week ago, we've been really slammed by the state of New Hampshire. Much higher pension costs, unrelated to anything the city is doing with wages, and reduced school aid. So going into the budget, we knew we were in a $11.8 million hole as a result of the actions taken by the state of New Hampshire. So I proposed a budget that I thought would offset these actions by the state as much as we possibly could as we come out of the pandemic. The first thing I asked our departments to do was to come in at 0%, and no increase from current year. Now, in trying to achieve that goal, we were assisted in part by very positive changes that have been made with respect to the city health insurance. The new reformed HMO plan realizes significant savings for the city for those employee groups who have agreed to adopt that plan. And we now have 6 employee groups who are on that plan. So with that 0% guideline in mind, we really took a hard look at all of the city hall departments and the city hall budgets. We exercised a lot of discipline. It wasn't easy. We eliminated some duplication, and as a result, the city hall departments, which include everything in this building and public health, resulted in a budget that is down nearly 3% from the current fiscal year. So we're proposing to reduce expenditures in City Hall and all of the associated departments by almost 3% from the current fiscal year. Public Works did the same thing. We were able there to reduce the budget from this year to next by about 1.3% approximately. Library, they were very disciplined. They were able to reduce their budget by about nearly 2. It was like 1.9%. So that is a big help. Now, we asked other departments to do the same, particularly fire and police. Not that we don't appreciate everything that those departments have done for us over the years, because they've done a lot, and they continue to do a lot, but they have received higher rates of increase over the last 5 years than our other departments. So I also asked them for 0%. Now, with respect to them, I have been suggesting that they have been making decisions over the last few years, decisions that I cautioned against, which would result in either higher taxes or a reduced level of services. They have differed with my advice, and as a result, I believe we are at that point where if we were to impose 0%, of course, there certainly would be a reduction in services. Now, in response to my 0% request, both departments, I would say, did not wish to comply with that, and they submitted budgets 4% for the fire department and around 2.6 for the police, saying that they couldn't survive 0%. So, in light of the importance of these departments, I proposed in the budget that I proposed you, Mr. Chairman, that we compromise with them, and instead of the 0 that other departments had complied with or exceeded, lower than even 0, I propose that they each live with 1.7%. That being the cost of living for the past year. Now, if my budget passes as proposed, I believe that rather than the 5.5% increase that the state has imposed, we can bring that increase down to somewhere in the range of 3 to 4%. We are being helped by the federal government, the American Rescue Plan, which we are proposing in the budget that we offset $4.4 million of lost revenue from school aid with the federal money that we are receiving. So if this budget were to pass as proposed, we believe that the tax rate increase would be in the 3 to 4% range, which is more than certainly we would like to ask from our hardworking Nashua taxpayers, but given the actions of the state of New Hampshire, service cuts would have to be even more drastic, or would have to be very drastic in order to bring that down, into the 1 to 2% range. Now, the police department has proposed a different approach. I don't really think, that's not sound. The idea of taking a one-time, basically unbudgeted expenditure for a piece of equipment and applying it to an operating budget, and we could get into the details, is not a sound practice. I mean, the thing that raises property taxes year after year are operating budgets, and when you use one-time money to save, one operating budget, you just increase the problems the following year. And we could talk about the details if you wish, Mr. Chair, but I think you all have a pretty good sense of what they are proposing. The fire department has suggested some minor cuts, postponing a new position for 6 months. I don't think a new position is warranted with the budget picture in mind. In City Hall, we have cut positions. Public Works, we've cut positions, not added them. And I just think that it is not fair either to the citizens of New Hampshire, of Nashua, or to the other departments to have them cutting all the time and having a couple of departments, going up more than or double the cost of living year after year after year. I mean, this just, as I've been saying for some time, this can't be sustained indefinitely. So, briefly, those are my thoughts. Certainly, CFO Griffin and Treasurer Fedette are here to give you their perspectives on any of these issues. I'm here, to answer any questions or respond to any ideas or anything. But those are, it gives you my overview on where I think we are.
I thought you might also want to mention that we would just name the 4th best-run city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. As a result of the good work, I think, of all of us, all of our city employees who've led the way over a period of time, we were recognized by Wallet Hub as having the 4th best run city in the United States. Now, if you go into that rating, a lot of that has to do with the expenditures that are made versus the quality of services. In other words, the efficiency of services. And of course, we, with very limited state aid, the Board of Aldermen, the mayor, and everyone is always looking to try to save as much money as we can, anywhere we can. And that's, I think, why the relative efficiency has been realized here in Nashua. So that's a rating that I feel very good about. I think we should all be proud of it, not only our government leaders, but all the city employees and everyone who works very hard for our citizens, but still does it very efficiently.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me.
Okay. So I'll entertain at this time any motions relative to the budget. Alderman Wilshire?
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to make a motion on page 144, line 90120, to add back $241,338, which was the mayoral budget adjustment. Our police department has worked and struggled to meet full complement. Full complement is really what they should achieve, because we pay less overtime, right? If we have 179 officers on the street, we're not paying as much overtime. And that's really been the goal. I think they've done a lot with this in the past year or two with having a more diversified police force, which I think the city represents the city better. And one of the things that they brought up during their budget presentation was the reintroduction of methamphetamines here in the city, and how the last many years with the fentanyl and heroin, a lot of people overdosing and dying, and those are more self-destructive drug abuses than the methamphetamines. Methamphetamines, as the police department said, they're more violent crimes. They're, people that are gonna break down doors and windows to get more money, to get more meth. It's really kind of scary, I think, and I just can't see cutting their budget, and that's my motion.
Okay, that motion is on the floor. I didn't know if Chief Corrigan was on, if he wanted to just speak to the motion and the impact if the cut were taken versus if the cut were restored. Chief?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate what we had said during my presentation, that we were asked to come in at a zero, and we were willing to do so. We will come in with whatever the mayor and the aldermen decide to do. However, I needed to make sure that everyone knew what that would look like. And the only thing we could do is eliminate bodies from our department. Now, we are just about at full staff, which we've been trying to do for the past several years at the recommendations and the support of the alderman and the mayor. So we've been working hard to get to that level. Now, keep in mind, we are commission authorized to be at 185 or 86 officers, and we are only at 179. So we still don't have the resources that we need to effectively do the department. And to cut bodies from us would be a huge hit. It would cause overtime to increase. It would cause sick time to increase, people to be ordered in more often, which could result in more injuries, more time on, more overtime. So it kind of perpetuates itself. We are not looking to increase anything. We have a very small, as you can see, the mayor mentioned operational costs. We only have an increase of about $20,000 in operational cost increases due to some software technology that we do need to do our jobs. Other than that, the only increase comes from pre-approved contracts that were passed through you folks. So the only thing we would have to do is to eliminate bodies, and I think that's a step in the wrong direction. I think the long-term difficulties in that, especially if we had to do so through layoffs, would really hurt the reputation of the city of Nashua. It would make it much more difficult for us to recruit officers, particularly the diversity of officers that we've been able to recruit and have come work for our department. So I appreciate all the support. I appreciate what you were willing to do. I hope you will consider my alternative. Again, it's an idea we had, we presented to you, so it's up to you to decide if it's feasible or not, but I would appreciate it. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, so the motion doesn't address the original vehicle, but we may talk about that later. At your presentation, you indicated that if the cut wasn't restored, that there was a risk of having to cut potentially one pop unit, resource officers at the high school, and I believe there was one other item that you were talking about, but those, I assume, still are potentials. Oh, and I know what the third one was, that you might lose the diversity of officers that you just have hired recently, because they'll be the first to go.
That's correct. And we would have to develop strategies to readjust the overtime and to make do with what we, with however we have to shift the bodies, and ultimately we have to put officers on the street. And as I mentioned before, if we have officers out on training, officers out on military leave, officers out injured, we have to take those bodies from somewhere. So those extra services that you see on a day-to-day basis, like your SROs, like your code enforcement officers, your bike patrols, those type of things would have to be sacrificed first. And I think they are a huge reason why, number one, we're the best agency in New England. Number two, why we're so effective in working with all the different groups in Nashua.
Okay, thank you. Any members from the Budget Committee that would like to speak? Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. So one of the things that was brought up was overtime and how having a full complement will help us bring it down. I'm hoping that'll be the case eventually, but if you look back in the budget from the last year, it doesn't look like it has gone down significantly. Can you just talk to that and where we might see those efficiencies in the future if you're at full complement?
Sure. It's, as you all know, it's really difficult to judge where we are this year from where we were last year because there were so many COVID-related changes and things put on hold and people out and federal funds coming in. So last year's a really difficult year to judge off of. But if you look back historically for us, we spend about $1.7 million in overtime on an annual basis, and we're budgeted for much less than that. So that overtime comes from mandatory trainings. We have officers that have to attend training every year, a certain amount of hours, especially with the different units that they're in. In addition to that, we're being asked to increase those hours in the next year to include a total of 6 hours of mandatory training from PSTC, to include bias-based training and stuff like that, which came out of the LEAC Commission. So we're going to have to increase mandatory training hours, which result in backfill overtime, and those things are unavoidable. They're situations where we have to fill the bodies on the street, and we can't, we have no other option.
That answer your follow-up?
Yes.
Follow-up, Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you for bringing up the training. So I know that there has been some mandated training that was pushed down to you guys after this budget was, if we passed the, proposed plan right now by Alderwoman Wilshire, I can speak. Would you have enough, and I know it's overtime and it's hard for you to tell, but I want to make sure that you have that funds to do that training, because I know there's some really important work in there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, and we would make it work. Again, we struggle with the overtime number, especially now that we're at full complement and we don't have the ability to pay that overtime through attrition. But we will make it, because it's mandatory training, we will make it happen. And we spend quite a bit of time, our Professional Standards Bureau spends quite a bit of time making sure any day of training, the officers involved, we minimize the impact of overtime, meaning we try to look for days that have extra bodies on the street. We try to minimize, take people from each shift to minimize what we have to pay for overtime. So all that we take into account, and it takes a great deal of time. And when you have to push through 179 officers, it gets difficult.
All set, or do you have follow-up? All set? Any other questions from the? I can just relate that as the liaison from the Board of Aldermen to the Police Commission, Karen Smith manages that overtime account extremely closely. And it's a balancing job all year long. Police are out for many different reasons, whether it's injuries from an arrest or COVID, especially this past year. There were a number of reasons people were out, confined because they were exposed. So it's very difficult to look at the overtime this past year. But I feel with a full complement of officers that they'll have a much better situation with overtime. They still need overtime for doing the training and other things that the chief just talked about. So, any other comments?
I have a question.
Yes, Alderwoman Kelly, and please, this is your first time in here, you gotta be right up to the microphone or they can't hear you.
Is that better?
That's better.
It's really far away from me, so let me pull it closer. It's actually much louder on Zoom, so I can always hear you guys when you say you can't hear me. So my question is around the vehicle that was discussed. I know you guys had put that out as an option. Would Alderman Wilshire's, would your motion include that, or would that be out of the budget?
Alderman Wilshire?
That's in SURF.
That's in SURF.
Yeah.
So this would be, and then we'd have to have a separate motion to take it out of SURF if we were gonna try to, okay, thank you. That's what I'm
In discussions with John Griffin and Mr. Fredette, it's not like last year, so it was much more difficult to do that kind of action, and something that we probably didn't want to get into. It's a long story. But I think we're going to take some other action on that for a different reason, not to cover this.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll ask an additional question when we get to SURF. Thank you.
All right?
Thank
If
you.
there's no other, Alderman Wilshire.
I just want to say that we've been voted the safest city to live in, I don't know, a couple times anyway. I think that speaks volumes to the men and women on our police department. And they certainly help us when we get accolades like the best run city. So thank you for your part in that as well.
I guess the other thing I'd like to point out is, well, it does sound like a lot of money that we're adding to the police budget. In consideration of what the increase would be to the tax rate, it's relatively really small. And I think the safety of the citizens of Nashua far exceeds, a few bucks here or there. And we're not at the full complement that they're allowed, except by current standards within the commissioners, and they're trying to get to that number. But they, over the last year, have saved a number of lives. And also, when they're doing these arrests for people on drugs, and there are a lot of them, these people are the type of people that would be robbing houses and businesses to get the money to support their habit. And if we take them off the street, it's much safer for the community. So if there are no other questions, Alderman Jette?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I fully support the police department, but these are difficult times, Chief, and I know you understand that. And when you came to us and presented your request, and you told us that in order to comply with the mayor's request, you would have to lay off 4 officers, you said. The mayor's only asking you to reduce your budget by $241,000. The average police officer, I think, earns over $70,000 in wages, and that's one of your lowest paid people. And when you add the benefits, it's well over $100,000 per officer. So, I have trouble understanding, and I asked you this question at the meeting, and you and Ms. Smith didn't seem to have an answer for it. I don't see why you would have to lay off 4 people to arrive at $241,000. I think the average officer is probably well over $100,000, and that's not even taking into consideration people leaving the force for whatever reasons. And in a budget, a $35 million budget, for you to say, or I shouldn't put it that way. In my opinion, finding $241,000 in a $35 million budget, seems perfectly capable. You're perfectly capable of doing that. And I know you've said to us, whatever we give you, you're going to make do with it. You're going to accept that decision. So I hate to make it. I appreciate the police department. I know you have a very tough job. I know it's dangerous. I know you're dealing with a lot of bad people. But I don't think the mayor's asking you to reduce your budget, your requested budget, by $241,000 under these circumstances is unreasonable. And I know putting budgets together, is a difficult task, but a lot of it is guesswork. You really don't know, what the, what attrition is going to do, what overtime is going to do. So I have trouble, supporting the motion. Thank you.
Chief, did Ms. Smith have something to say, or did you want to add something?
No, I'll defer to Ms. Smith in a minute. I just want to remind Alderman Jette that, the numbers that we give a first-year special officer, we have to assume that an officer is going to come in at that level, which is much lower than the $70,000 that you claim. And I understand that there are benefits with that. We hadn't originally factored those in. The problem becomes, whether it be 2, 3, or 4 bodies, we're taking a step backwards. We have to fill those positions. We've been forced to budget through attrition for a number of years, and we've explained every year how difficult that is and how problematic it is for us to factor into the overtime. At everybody's advice, we tried to get to fully budget authorized strength, which is 179. And if we don't get that amount we need to, we're going to have to cut bodies. And if we do that, services are going to suffer. Services will suffer. People are going to get into overtime and take more time off, and we're going to pay more money in overtime. So that's going to have a significant impact in the long term. The other thing is you can't predict when people are going to leave and when they're not. Right before the pandemic hit, we had an employee who had put in for retirement, and because of COVID, withdrew that after at the last minute because they were concerned about what would happen long term. So we can't just assume, well, we think these people are going to go at this point in the year, and so we'll develop our budget accordingly, because then if they don't, then we're going to run out of money, and it's irresponsible. So I'm going to let Karen articulate a little bit better about the cost of the officers and her reply as well.
Ms. Smith?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add the overtime.
Could you just explain your position for the stenographer so she knows who's speaking?
Karen Smith, Business Manager, Nashua Police Department.
Thank
And
you.
I just wanted to add, the positions are funded and the payroll account and the overtime account are shared. So if the positions are not funded, we have to have that funding to take care of the overtime costs. So you're not going to be able to reduce the budget in order to fund the problem with the budget. Those funds are required to fund the attrition. So basically the attrition is paying for the other side of our budget, because that's how our budget has been prepared.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mayor?
Just briefly, in the year ended June 30, 2020, including overtime, everything, base pay, everything, the average patrolman made about $95,000.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. I have a larger question for potential CFO Griffin or Treasurer Pratt
A
here.
little
but
closer to the microphone, I think.
I'm sorry, I'm learning the new microphone. Is that better? I should
That's
know
better.
this. I sing all the time. I should know mic presence is important. Okay. So my question is, I think that, Alderman Wilshire has a motion on the floor, but also, there are other departments who came in above the mayor's budget as well. I'd like to know, what if we were to approve the department proposed budgets, all of them, what would that look like in terms of an increase?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, Chief Financial Officer. If we add back the 241,338, and in the next department, probably the fire department, roughly 418,000, that would be the impact of restoring the departments that requested more than what the mayor described at the very beginning of this proceeding.
Maybe I can clarify. So if we were to, so I see the fire, what I see is 495,955. And then the school budget also is somewhere in that range. If we were to do all three big ones, what would it?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, just trying to get an idea of.
I can
What?
give you an answer. It's around 0.4%, so the rate, and this is ballpark, would go up to around 4 or the low 4s.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
And if
All
that's
set.
not correct, Mr. Griffin can be more precise.
Mr. Griffin?
John Griffin, CFO, that is correct.
Okay,
Slightly over 4%.
okay, thank you.
So instead of between 3 and 4, it'd be slightly over 4.
Correct.
Thank you.
And right now, I think we're looking at the mayor's, we're looking at what?
Well, we think between 3 and 4%, but most likely somewhere around 3.6.
And as I had explained before, the reason we can't hit an exact number is there are other hands in the pot that contribute to it, like the county and the state sets the rate anyway, so, but
The
we're
county
trying
seems
to
to-
estimate based on what we know.
the county seems to be going up a little more than we originally projected for reasons that I don't understand, but given that they're getting $80 million of federal money, but that, is a longer discussion.
Right. Any other questions on the motion on the floor?
If I could ask one more follow-on, please.
Certainly.
So, Mayor, you brought up the CARES Act funding and that you're recommending around 4 million be put in this year. Do you know the total pot, and are there alternate ways that we could be using that funds?
Mayor,
The amount the amount we will get is about $8 million a year for 2 years running. And the parameters within which that can be spent are still somewhat uncertain. What has come out is a set of interim regulations, a set of a guidance, and then, strangely, a set of answers to frequently asked questions. And it seems that the answers to the frequently asked questions, which came out just maybe 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I think June 10th maybe, or I forget. Maybe after that. Anyway, the answers to the frequently asked questions seem to be more restrictive than the so-called guidance. So what's clear is that, lost revenue from the state can be offset. And the areas where it is very clear that we have lost revenue are related to the artificial decline in the free and reduced lunch number, which we've talked about as a result of all lunches being free, and the reduction in the census, which the school department believes is largely temporary because it is focused primarily in the very young kindergarten, pre-K type students. They think families, just didn't send those young kids to school, but they eventually will arrive. Those two numbers total about 4.4 million. So I think we can safely replace that 4.4 million. And if we do that, rather than 5 something, we're down into the 3 area. And that leaves us $4 million this year while we learn more about precisely about the parameters, and allows us to think about future years and how we can gradually see what happens with school aid next year, and gradually adjust to a permanent reduction if that's what happens, or not if it doesn't.
Follow-up, please.
Follow-up?
Yes, please.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you've talked a bit about not wanting to reduce the budget with one-time funds.
Yes.
So maybe this is a CFO Griffin question, but if we are including these CARES Act funds for a number of years, are we then going to be, saddled with a much larger tax increase in 2 to 3 years when that money runs out?
Well,
Mayor,
I mean, there is that aspect to this, in the sense that eventually the American CARES Act money will go away. Now, but we are confronted with a situation where in this year, we're hit very hard by the state of New Hampshire, and we're seeking to offset some of that, proposed in the budget is to offset some of that with the 4.4 million. Now, we would have $12 million left, and some time to adjust to and some funds to possibly the taxes lower. Section does suggest that we would apply $4.5 million of surplus as, same amount we did last year to tax relief, which would be a neutral from last year, of city surplus.
Okay, thank you.
All set, or follow-up?
If I could have one more follow-up, please. I know there was some discussion around some of the CARES Act funds going to the school department. Is that outside those 8 million, or is that
Yeah,
within that 8 million?
No, they get a lot, they get much more than that, of money that, maybe Chairman Dowd can talk a little bit about some of what they're hoping to do. Their guidance is also a little unclear, but they're getting significantly more.
They're getting a substantial amount of money over the next 2 or 3 years, 2 years. And again, it's trying to figure out what it's allowed to be spent on. The one thing we definitely know is not allowed to be spent on salaries.
Right.
But and I think when we get a little further along, if we want to ask that question, Mr. Donovan is on, so I think we ought to defer that until we get to a point where Mr. Donovan can speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to look at the big picture before we start making smaller motions. Thank you.
You know, that's a whole different big picture.
I know.
Alderman Jette?
Mr. Chairman, I'm getting a message that in spite of your instruction to Alderman-at-Large Kelly.
I'm not speaking loud enough.
No, you're speaking fine. It's the mayor who is
We always had that problem at finance, didn't
keeps
we, Jim?
leaning back away from the microphone, and he's not being heard.
Good
Okay,
catch. Good
sorry.
catch, Alderman Jette.
I was in trouble.
Okay, so any other questions relative to the motion that's on the floor right now? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Is there another motion? Alderman Wilshire?
I do have another motion on page 359. Sorry, I gotta get there. Line 10 to change that from being funded by cash to bonding it, $495,745 for 2006 Freightliner MT-55 van. That's my motion.
Okay, any follow-up on, or?
No, I mean, it's an expensive piece of equipment. It's been in use for 16 years. It just seems like it's something we could bond. There's not much money in SURF either, I guess, in this budget.
Right, I heard this was coming and had discussions with Mr. Griffin and Mr. Fredette. It is eligible to be bonded with the bonding rates the way they are right now. It would allow $500,000 to stay in the SURF fund, which is woefully underfunded, and I'm pretty sure, I think the mayor is going to add some after all the revenues are in for this year. But it's woefully underfunded, and we have this opportunity. Some of our other fire vehicles, for instance, that are very expensive, we have bonded. If it's gonna last 16, 17 plus years, and with the bonding rate the way it is, I think that's the most cost-effective way to go, although I'll defer to the professionals. But
Can I ask just is the chief still on here?
Chief is still on there.
Yes.
What do you think the anticipated life of that equipment would be? Is it the 16 or 17 years that you got out of the last one?
Chief Kerrigan?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. After our discussion on the SURF, we had gone through and evaluated the vehicle. We can certainly push that vehicle out structurally for another year or two if we needed to. However, the technology inside that building is getting to be quite outdated. And as you know, that mobile command unit is, so yes, to answer your question simply, we could get another 15 to 18 years out of that vehicle, possibly planning to build it so it's upgradable software in the future, 10, 15 years out. It's just that we have to have that, as you know, that's the vehicle that is the mobile command center, handles all the holiday stroll, the 4th of July. And in the event that the department went down for whatever reason, that's a ability to dispatch anybody in the city.
So, talking about that here, that is something we think we could bond, and it would, for 15 years probably.
Yeah.
And it would stretch the expenses out and reduce, as Alderman Wilshire suggests, would reduce the surf expenses that would immediately need to be spent.
Being a little familiar with technology from my former career, and having witnessed the equipment inside this vehicle, if that equipment's been in there for 16 years, it's an antique. And because of the nature of what the vehicle is used for, command and control for all emergency services, it behooves us to, for the safety of, again, of the citizens of Nashua, to upgrade that vehicle, replace that vehicle with the equipment, much like, I wish we could get it on a grant, but I don't see any grants flying out there right now for it, like we did with a piece of fire equipment. But this is can be a very critical piece of equipment. Do you agree, Chief?
Yes, I do. And I believe Justin Cates is on, and he would agree as well as fire department.
Okay.
We will need a bonding resolution, but that's,
Yes.
that's obvious.
I actually think that we could probably, defer to Mr. Griffin, but I think we can do this outside of actually passing the budget, right? This is not part of the budget.
Correct.
So we can take the action from this evening, but we can do a bond resolution, and it doesn't affect the budget one way or the other. Other than the fact that it's going to keep the SURF special revenue account a lot healthier than it would be if we bought it in cash.
Correct.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Any other motions? By the way, just before we go too far, when we finally get to the last motion, which will be to approve whatever budget's before us after all these motions, then that goes to the full board, and other motions could be made at the full board. Board of Al- necessarily what comes out of this meeting tonight. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think I explained that correctly. Okay, are there any other motions? Alderman Tencza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm not on the committee, but I would have a motion with respect to the fire department for the committee's consideration.
Yeah, having conferred with Corporation Counsel, you can make it through one of the members of the committee, and I think I have a volunteer here to my left.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let him make the motion.
Oh.
And then you say, I'll make that motion.
I so yield.
Thank you, and actually, well, the motion would be to add money back into the bottom line budget for the Nashua Fire Department FY 2022 in the mayor's proposed budget. The exact amount of that I will defer to Alderman O'Brien on, if that's okay. And after Alderman O'Brien officially makes the motion, I'd like to just speak to it if I may.
Okay, Alderman O'Brien, you wanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to add on page 152, Department 152, on the bottom line, the amount of $418,775. And I'll
Okay,
yield to Alderman Tencza.
Alderman Tencza.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to make this motion and just speak to this tonight. Hard on the amendment lightly, but as the liaison to the fire department, I thought it was important to bring forth this amendment to the committee for its consideration and the entire Board of Aldermen. Firefighters. Significant go or lost through attrition if that $417,000 were to be lost. It may also, and I know the chief is on the line, it may also mean that there are potential gaps in coverage and potentially that response times are down and even a firehouse is shut down. Given that would be a significant blow to our fire department. Much like the police department, we look to the fire department as a source of pride for the city. One that we look and can easily say is the best in the state, probably the best in New England, if not the whole country. We have asked the fire department to do, we asked them to do much more than just fight fires when they come up. And over the last 10 to 15 years, they've stepped up and helped out citizens in Nashua with all sorts of different things other than just responding when there is an emergency, or a fire emergency, I should say. So, for those reasons, I think just in and of himself, I think it's important to restore this money back into the budget. But this would also, what this would do, this money would help restore a public educator and investigator into the fire marshal's office here in the city. It would allow them to go and do more proactive work for the fire department, especially in our schools. I know that was one of the things that the chief talked about when he was here in front of the committee, talking about the importance of this. It would not fund the position for the entire year, but just for half the year. But that would be a good timeline at this point in order to hire somebody for the last 6 months of FY '22. The last thing, I'll say about this is that I think that, the firefighter budget has gotten the fire department budget has gotten a lot of attention. The Board of Aldermen has approved the contract for the firefighters last year. And I think we knew that and so I think even back then, I think the chief was honest with us about what the increase was going to look like. This, I guess my point is that this should not necessarily be a shock to anybody. And I think that, since we've made this commitment already to the fire department, we should follow through and restore this money and let them deliver the services that we're all used to, that we all appreciate, and that, keeps our city safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Alderman Brand?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. I think Alderman Tencza has done a fine job in explaining everything, but being of Irish, let me glom on some more, if I may. As many of you know, I have had a past history of 35 years employment with the firefighters. I had worked with this additional position in the schools. This is schools. Why do they have a public safety person? If you look back into your history, and the Bible of the fire department is the NFPA handbook, and it says, why do doors open outside to let the public out? It's because of the coconut Coconut Grove fire that occurred. And why schools? Why have a public safety officer go into the schools is because of tragedy in Chicago of Our Lady of the Angels. And unfortunately, it was appropriately named because they made a lot of angels that day. It was a tragedy, and it's something that could be looked up historically. But it's just not our schools. We have 18 of them, okay? It's also some of the daycare centers that go on to the city. So this is a position that was cut in 2006, okay? And since my involvement of 35 years on the fire department, I've seen a lot of cuts. I mean, every city building in the city has fiber optic tied to it. It wasn't ferries that dragged that fiber optic. It was the fire department through their cabling system that did that for the city of Nashua. Have we forgotten the opioid crisis that has occurred in the city? And who do we rely on? We relied on the fire department to come up with that. And we paid an awful lot of money to have a report done on the fire department that tells us it's going to need, as what Alderman Tencza said, 2 additional stations. Yet we're going to lay off, if we don't approve this, lay off 16 firefighters. How do you do that? And I don't want any part of that because I don't want to pick the ward. Tell somebody in the ward that I'm cutting that fire company that's in your neighborhood. Because what do? AMR ambulance comes from a central location. They're the ones that are going to be there relatively quickly because they're in your neighborhood. The fire station is in your neighborhood. They're going to be there relatively quickly. And I say this not to be Chicken Little, the sky is falling. But if you look at the tragedy that just happened down in Miami-Dade, nobody knew that building was going to fall. September 10th, nobody knew that America was going to be attacked, but who did they rely on? It was the firefighters that did step up to the plate, as we see in Metro-Dade. They're the ones digging in the pile. And our guys, I can say this because I took that training, they have had training on just that. So this is a very well-educated force. I think it needs to remain intact. I think the additional will improve the safety to our elderly, to our schools, to our daycares by having this, and relieve many of the other fire marshals to some of the big buildings that are going on. We're looking at the School Street property, various other projects that we so much desire in the city. So this will allow those fire marshals to do that particular job. Like the fire chief said, it was 500 pages just on one building. This will free up that marshal to really pour over those documents. So I'm going to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak. And I thank Alderman Tencza and his liaisonship to bring this forward. And I'm definitely going to support this. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't know if I believe Chief Rhodes is not with us, I'm not sure, but Assistant Chief Buxton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate the support. Alderman O'Brien is a very tough act to follow. He's very education/investigative position. This would seek to pay more attention to our most vulnerable sections of the population, our children and our elderly. To be quite frank, in 2006, when that position was cut, we've tried to keep our head above water in dealing with those populations, but we're failing miserably. The Fire Marshal's office on the whole is treading water, as Chief Rhodes had stated at our previous presentations. We don't get our place of assembly permits, inspections done as we're required to by the state law. And no, we don't get a lot of calls of complaints on this because no one's going to call looking for an inspection to be done. They only call us when they need to have their liquor license renewed, when it's going to hurt their business. So that's why the phone's not ringing off the hook looking for us to bolster the sport in that position. One of the other areas that was highlighted in the master plan was we are very close to being an ISO rated 1 fire department. We'd be the first in the state of New Hampshire. We're currently a high 2 rating. Manchester is the only other 2 in the state. But cuts such as that are being proposed would devastate that and knock us way back into the low end of the 2 classification. We're just a hair away from achieving that 1 status, and with some small changes, the public education officer is one of them that would help push us over the top to achieve that. I think Alderman O'Brien and Alderman Tencza laid out a good idea of why we need this money, and I can answer any questions anybody else may have.
Does anybody have any questions for Chief Buxton? No? Thank you, Assistant Chief.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any, Mayor?
Yes, I just wanted to talk about a few of these numbers. Now, I don't disagree with anything that, in terms of the value of the fire department, that Alderman Tencza or Alderman O'Brien said. But, we do have to, in considering the overall city budget and the taxpayers of the city, have to consider, overall what can be afforded and how our money should be allocated. So if this raise is granted, the fire department will be up 27% over 6 years, far more than any other department, more than the police, significantly 10% more than schools. And, if you continue to fund one department to the exclusion of others, other services are going to be hurt. There's no question. Because there's a finite, there's only so many dollars that the city can come up with. I would also like to question or raise an issue regarding this idea, again, that 16 firefighters would have to go. Now, the fire department proposed an $861,000 increase, 4%. I brought that down to 1.7%. So the difference is, whatever the motion was, 400,000, the high fours?
It was
418.
418.
Now, the average firefighter in the year ended June 30, 2020, made $85,000. That's firefighter. The average lieutenant made $113,000 when everything is included, the actual amount that the city paid out. Now, those numbers are going to go up considerably with the new contract, probably for the firefighter into the mid-90s, probably for a lieutenant, $125,000, $130,000, plus benefits, plus pensions. The idea that 400,000 would translate to 16 firefighters, 16 firefighters would probably cost, millions of dollars. Probably, $3 million. So $2.5–3 million. So, I don't think that 400,000, certainly, yes, it would be difficult, but 400,000 does not equate to 16 firefighters.
I think I can defer this in a minute to the Assistant Chief, but the reason it's 16 is there are 4 firemen on a truck at any one time. So if in that fire company, you eliminate 4 of them, you don't have anybody to cover that, so you're eliminating that whole fire company. That's 16 firemen and 1 truck. I don't think that speaks well for the safety of the city, especially when we just had a report that came in that said that we should be looking at and we're not looking at it in this budget or anytime soon, but we should have 2 additional fire stations because of response time. Even taking 1 truck offline puts some people at jeopardy, because I've observed that medical emergencies, fire emergencies, accidents, the first people there are the fire department. In accidents, if they took one of the ladder trucks offline, then there would be a significant portion of the city where if somebody got in an accident and needed the equipment to get them out of the car to save their life, they wouldn't have it fast enough. And if you look at how fast it takes for a building to burn down, if you don't have the response time, that instead of having a fire that you can recover from, your house is going to burn to the ground. We've seen some recently that even with a response time, the fires were catastrophic. And we've had a lot of fires and a lot of accidents and things in this past year. And I you know, it's yes, it's not, the amount of money we're talking about is not for funding 16 firefighters, but it's like, you know, taking a portion of, taking one of your fingers off, and, you know, it's you have to have the whole 16 to man the fire company and the fire truck. So that's the issue. And as far as the fire, in the fire inspector's office, I can tell you in the new school project that we've had the fire marshals involved in 2 of the schools now, and certainly the 3rd when we build a new one. And they have done a lot of critical inspections. We've corrected a lot of things at fairgrounds that they captured, but it's a state requirement to look at these schools twice a year by the fire marshal's office, and they haven't been doing that. And that could well be a safety issue for our students.
All right, but I was just saying that 400,000 doesn't equate to 16 firefighters, in the sense that that would suggest a firefighter all in, benefits, pensions, wages, makes $25,000, when the real number is more like probably with everything, probably 150. So, you know, yes, adjustments would have to be made, no question about it. And, you know, the board has to decide whether you wish to undertake that, but it's not 16 firefighters.
And as far as the fire marshal is concerned, I agree, we should not be hiring any more people than we have to. I think this is one of the have-tos, and I'm glad that it got pushed off at least 6 months, because it's going to take time to hire and train. But it's a position that was, you know, you said the last 6 years. Well, go back 12 years. The previous mayor cut the heck out of the fire department and cut that position. And also those firemen took a 0 pay increase 1 year in that time frame. So some of the past 6 years has been catch up from being hit previously.
All right, but this mayor hasn't cut the fire department. If this thing is granted, it's up 27% in 6 years, so I've hardly cut the fire department. Now, I keep hearing about the 0, so I look back and look. Now, the city made a very big concession in exchange for that 0. And maybe, if I'm wrong about this, Alderman O'Brien can correct me, but I believe that from what I've been told, and I was not in office then, but what I've been told, the schedule used to be 14 hours on, a day off, 10 hours on, a day off. You had to report to the fire station 4 times in 8 days, and you worked 2 14s and 2 10s. The schedule was shifted to a 24-hour schedule, so that you worked now 24 straight hours and only have to report to the firehouse twice in 8 days. Now, same number of hours is being worked, but as I've been told, that was a big request of the firefighters. They didn't want to do 14-10, 14-10, they wanted to do 24. Okay, the city agreed to that in exchange for a 0. Now, this goes back 15 years or something, a long time. But, yeah, that did happen, but it wasn't quite as simple as we took a zero.
Alderman
And I
O'Brien?
think we've made up for it, given
Yeah,
what we have done over the years here.
I could probably answer that, Mr. Mayor. You are correct. Originally, at one time, the firefighters had worked 2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights. And so the people at home that don't understand it, firemen physically put in 48 hours a week into the station, but they pay you only for 42. And at the end of 8 weeks, you salary out, and basically you get your pay, so they average it out. Now, there are 8 different ways you can run a fire department schedule. One of them is the 24. One of them is the 10-hour days and 14 nights. I think there are 4 ways you can run the days and the nights. It's at the end, nobody, if you look at the dollar amount, well, I'm just saying, Mr. Mayor, the dollar amount is, I don't see where the firemen, why they got the zero. I don't think it was because of that, because it was nothing to the city. They still put 48 hours in the stations, and you compensated them for 42. So there was no gift. Nothing came in the box with a bow.
So maybe it was, good for both sides, but that was a long time ago. Right now, if we look forward, the firefighters are paid pretty, fairly well. As I said, the average firefighter is making 85 before the new contract. Lieutenant's 113, so we're gonna be paying our firefighters, in the mid-90s. So I don't think we can, this idea that we're underpaying people, because they took a zero at some point, I don't think is a fair critique of the city.
I also believe when the fire chief gave his presentation, that the firefighters in Nashua aren't near the top in the whole state of New Hampshire as for pay.
I think you should look at the numbers before you say that.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. I would also, too, Mr. Mayor, if I may address it, and I understand the difficulty of your position, so I hope you understand mine.
I do understand it.
Thank you. And with that in mind, it seems like, and I'm not saying this administration, but we're talking about something that happened in 2006. This position existed in 2006, and it vaporized. The need didn't vaporize. As with what happened, the fire department adapted and tried its best. Now we're at the break point, and listening to the chief, he would like this position to be refilled. But when 2006, I could say, well, how many other budgets were compensated fully? Why did the fire department in 2006 take that hit? Also, too, in looking, I did mention as far as the fiber optic is the fire department, Chief Buxton can bring that up. But in doing so, they used to have 3 people to the wire division that used to go out and physically maintain the fire alarm cable. Now I think, and Chief Buxton, you can, things may have changed since I've left the gate or the yard there, but now there's only 2. So I'm just saying, the fire department has had a long, very sad history of cuts. And some point, when you get to these cuts, some points you got to look at it and say, well, we can't do it anymore. And you're within your rights to say, we may need to reevaluate it and get it restored. And I think with this, particularly with this position for the schools, and that it is one of those positions that need to be restored. And it's not a full year. I think the fire chief is doing it prudently, coming back within the 6 months, and just, funding it, not the full budget cycle, but half the budget cycle. And the thing is, I have 35 years on the fire department. I never saw any fat. We always try to make whatever they gave us. I mean, I remember even sometimes laughing that, do we have to bring in our own toilet paper come, the end of June, because we gotta make it to the budget. There's really been no fat there, so I'll just say that, and if I could refer to Chief Buxton, if he wants to.
Yes, he has his hand up. Chief Buxton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Buxton, Nashua Fire. I appreciate the seriousness of the decision in front of us here tonight. And I don't want to get drawn into a debate about what has happened in the past, but I do just want to clarify a couple of facts. Back in 2006, we did suffer a significant budget hit. We've been working to try to gain some ground through the past few years. To the mayor's point, we have grown 27% under his administration, and we're very thankful for that. But that has only added 4 positions to help us modernize an equation that had been in place since the 1960s, I believe, in our fire alarm division. So all of those other cuts that we listed in our budget presentation still have not been restored. As far as the pay of our firemen, we're ranked 5th within the state. Yes, our firemen do make about $90,000 a year. That's because of the hours that they put in shift coverage. The reason that 16 positions would need to be cut is because that is one fire company. We cover positions 1 for 1. A member calls in sick or a member takes vacation leave, that position needs to be filled by another of equal value. And that creates shift coverage, which eventually sometimes translates to overtime costs. And as you know, we have a large overtime number in our budget. The master plan spoke to many of these factors and different models that we could use to move the organization forward, all which we plan on studying and prioritizing and presenting you with a plan from our strategic planning committee. Moving forward, the Fire Marshal's office is certainly overwhelmed. Many of the larger projects that are undertaken in the city, Alderman Dowd has worked with them at fairgrounds. There's school projects going on, housing projects. The larger projects like the PAC Center, the middle school that's going to be undertaken out on Buckmeadow Road, Bronstein Apartments, School Street. Besides the plans and the hours that our inspectors and investigators invest in the office, those all require roughly 100 or so site inspections that they need to undertake. So if you list out 6 large developments that we have going on in the city, and that's very easy to do at this point in time, there's 600 inspections that we're requiring 3 people to do at this point in time. And that's before they've touched any place of assemblies. That's before they've looked at any of the schools and met what we need to do as far as state requirements. By cutting a fire company, by cutting our personnel, that's going to hurt our ISO rating. That's also going to hurt us in an area called NFPA 1710, which is cited several times in the master plan study. That's required for our response, and that speaks to the amount of staffing and the amount of time we have to respond to emergency in our community. So, one of the last things I guess I would touch on is, the 0% that you always hear people talk about. The firemen took a 0% in the past. We did take a 0%. We also took a healthcare concession that cost our members money. I was one of them. My pay decreased that year by a couple $1,000s for that healthcare concession. Yes, the mayor is correct. We conceded and we got a schedule change. We got a change to our promotional process, and the members also got the ability to request where they would like to work. So those are the things that they got in exchange for 0% and the healthcare concession. So I'm very appreciative of the effort that's been put in, very appreciative of the mayor and his effort to help grow the fire department into these difficult times and help us dig our way out of this hole that we were put in back in 2006. And I'm here to answer any further questions you may have.
Are there any other questions from the Budget Committee on the motion that's on the floor? Alderman Jette?
I don't have a question so much. I guess, this is I hope everyone understands, the difficult position that we're in. You've heard the mayor talk about, how the state has, continues to shortchange the city. And it's true. The legislature just, in spite of the best efforts of our delegation, the legislature just passed a budget where they granted tax cuts to businesses and large businesses, businesses that are out-of-state businesses. They reduced they're in the process of reducing the interest and dividends tax. And, they talk about how they're helping seniors because seniors pay interest and dividends tax. But, most seniors don't pay that tax because there's quite an exemption before you get to pay that tax. The people who really pay that tax are very wealthy people, and that's being eliminated. The state, the city can only look to the property tax. That's the only means we have of raising money. So every time the state cuts taxes on businesses, or cuts the rooms and meals tax, or cuts the interest and dividends tax, those are all, sources of revenue that the state has that the city doesn't have. The city is limited, to the property tax, and when the state cuts those taxes, they also cut the amount of aid that they're giving to the city. And you've heard the mayor talk in detail about that, and I won't, repeat it, but it is putting us in a very difficult position. And I want the people who are cheering for these tax cuts that the legislature is making, I want them to understand that as a result, the city, in order to pay for the fire department, to pay for the police department, these these changes that we're being asked to make, in order to do that, we're going to have to raise your property taxes, your real estate property taxes, because that's the only source of money we have. So I hope the police department understand, and I hope the fire department understands that, we as the Board of Aldermen, we don't control your budgets. We don't make decisions about who you hire, how many people you hire, how many, how you do that, or the police department. You're run by independent commissions, and you come to us, and all we have is control over the bottom line. And, when you come to us and you say, well, if we cut what the mayor is proposing, it's gonna, you're gonna have to eliminate people. You're not gonna be able to rehire someone that was the position that was eliminated a long time ago, 15 years ago. That suddenly this year we have to hire that person. You can hire whoever you want. Last year you came to us and you said we needed to increase your pay, and now you're saying that because basically you're saying because we increased your pay, which you asked us to do, now you need more money in order to do other things that you want to do, which are all good things. I'm not saying that the arguments you're making in favor of people are not good arguments. We're talking about the general overriding good of the city, lower tax rate, lower interest rates, and safety, and all of those things. You make great arguments, but where do we, how do we pay for this? we have to, raise the taxpayers and, the tax on the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are telling us, we're not getting, I think what you're asking for amounts to us, I think is it a 6% increase? Who's getting a 6% increase? And, you make good arguments. I can't argue with you with the specifics of your arguments. All I can do is control, or attempt to control the bottom line. And I hope you appreciate the difficult position we're in to accommodate the police department, to accommodate your department. It's going to result in a tax increase that, if it may be worth it. Maybe the citizens will understand that, because of the reduction in taxes that the state is doing, and cutting back on the support for the cities and towns for education, and for our share of the rooms and meals tax and all these other sources of financial aid that the city depends upon, by reducing that in order to fulfill what we need to do for the fire department and the police department, we have to increase taxes. I guess that's the decision we're left with, that in order to do that, we've got to adopt an increase in this budget that, and if it costs more money, if it costs the taxpayers more money, then, I guess we're saying that, in the long run, it's worth it to the taxpayers, and we hope they understand that and appreciate that. But, I for one, I think what the mayor has proposed is reasonable under the circumstances. So, again, I'm not gonna, I can't vote for the motion that's before us now. Thank you.
Alderman Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The master plan was a really great idea. It showed us where we need to make changes. And it was clear that you're going to work on that. I don't think the problem is in what you're asking for. I think it's what's coming down from the state. As Alderman Jette has said, the real issue, as far as I can see, is the retirement system that's going to be required. Without that in there, I don't think your budget would have increased that much. I really don't. I think that that's unfair to do to you. It's unfair to do to the city. And I think that the retirement system needs to be addressed very soon on this issue. There are two departments in the city that really are boots on the ground. They're the people that make us safe, that ensure that no matter what, that our lives are protected. The fire and the police, and we can't short you. We simply cannot. It means our lives, and I think the citizens of the city understand that. And if you look at the rest of this budget, you look at how very incredibly frugal it has been. That the City Hall has done a tremendous job keeping the costs down, and a little more for the fire and the police. I think the citizens of the state. Citizens of this city are going to understand that this is essential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? And just a couple things. You mentioned, not necessarily in any order, but you mentioned pension plans. I think a lot of people don't understand that the employees pay a significant amount into their own pension plans. And that's been increasing as well. And that comes out of their pay. So they've been paying more, the state's forcing us to pay more, and you know what the state's paying? Nothing.
Right.
It's a state pension plan. They're paying nothing. On top of that, in my opinion, they're not managing the funds very well either, which is a bigger problem. And by the way, the monies that are in this motion are a compromise. There's still an 80K mayor cut left in this motion. And there are several things that the fire department had requested that they aren't going to get funded. To me, and as the mayor said, and that group of 3 people over there have managed the budget and the finances for the city extremely well. And we would, if it weren't for the state throwing down all these charges on us, we would have near 0 property tax increase. But I, for one, am not gonna let the state allow us or push us into forcing our citizens to be at jeopardy because we have to cut essential services. Not gonna happen. If people have a concern with their property taxes, go after them hard. I think some
Mr.
of the.
Chairman, could I just reiterate that once more? So, in effect, the state is cutting, the actions of the state result in Walmart paying less, and senior citizens and other property owners, single-family homes, et cetera, paying more. That's the act. Now, our delegation, 2 of which are here, did not support this, but that's what happened. Now, the only issue is how do we deal with that, and that's, and we can talk about the pension system. I just want to say one more thing about it. I occasionally get these statements, it's because your wages are so high. No, that is not correct. The pension system themselves will tell you, 80% of the money we're paying in is to build up the capital of that system and has nothing to do with current wages, current employees, nothing to do with it. So the state made a mess, they're making us pay for it, and Walmart's getting a tax cut.
Yeah, 2 other things. One, several years ago, whoever was managing the state pension fund up in Concord lost a lot of money. Now they're trying to recover, and they're trying to get to 100% in a short time frame. First of all, most pension plans across the United States are not 100% funded, and everybody's not retiring at the same time. So 100% is an illogical goal, and doing it in a shorter time frame is even more illogical. So I have asked our legislators to have the pension group come down here and talk to us and tell us, what are you doing? But again, I for one, am not going to let the state put any of our citizens in jeopardy because we're having to cut essential services. I don't know how many times firemen they always get to the scene first, and they're all paramedics, and some of them even have more medical training, and they're the ones saving your lives. Would you rather pay $5 more in your taxes, or even $25 more in your property tax? But if you have a serious accident, there's a fireman there that can save your life? I don't think so. Anyone else? Alderman Kelly, did you have? No? Anyone? All right, motion on the floor is on page 132, Department 152, to add to the bottom line of the fire department, I can't even read my own writing, $418,775. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Are there any other motions? Alderman Kelly.
Yes, I would like to make a motion for page 265, Department 191, School, 9,500. I would like to restore $402,770 to the school budget.
Could you give that number again?
402,770.
4027.
If you're looking at 265, it's that one.
Where'd that number?
What page?
That's the page, that's what I got right
Page
here.
265.
The very last page, same page we've been looking at all the other departments.
265.
Bottom line cut, mayor's cut.
Did you find it, Alderman Dowd?
No,
Yeah, I'm getting there.
this is not a cut, this is a transfer. This is the cut.
Okay,
But that, mine doesn't say that. Mine says something else. See that?
I believe it's, Mr. Griffin, would you explain
Yes,
that? I don't think that's the number we're looking at.
I could, Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, CFO.
Yeah.
The mayoral budget adjustment on
It's all the way up. So,
page 265, 90,
65.
91, 90120 is 119,300. That's the number.
I'll
Just for
amend my motion to that.
clarification,
Thank you.
just for clarification, the expense transfers are just that. They're to other funds.
That's a transfer, okay.
Correct.
Then I will amend to the 119,300. I want to make them whole as well. Sorry for my misunderstanding.
Okay,
If I could speak to it as well.
yes.
Sorry.
I'm
We've done-
sorry, could you restate what you're?
Sure. I am looking to reallocate the mayoral cut, which is 119,300, to the school budget, much like we just did with the fire and the police. And I
Okay.
was misunderstanding because there was a transfer in there and I got confused. So sorry for the miscommunication.
Okay. Do you want to speak to it?
I sure do. Thank you. We've had lots of impassioned speeches about the other essential services in our city, and I know that we've gotten great reviews from Wallet Hub, et cetera, about being a very well-run city, and I think we would be remiss to not shine a light on the educators, especially with the past year. It's been an incredibly tough year for educators, and our administration, our teachers, have really risen multiple times to do whatever we asked them to do. So we said full remote, they figured that out. We told them hybrid, they figured that out. And within that, they were working with children, as, you know, especially special education children, et cetera, to work through what that happened to, you know, what that did to them in terms of like, how do you go from being in school and learning behavioral things and having all those, you know, little notes that happen in person and not being able to do that. So they've done an incredible job. I want to make sure that they are whole. I know that the pieces in their budget that were critical was a board certified behavioral analyst, which they want to, it would address some of the things I was just talking about in terms of students coming back to school full time and trying to pick up from where they left off 15 months or 18 months ago. So I think they are an integral part of the essential services of our city, and they deserve to be made whole as well.
Okay. I'm going to look for Mr. Donovan, but I recall, and when he gave his presentation, that he felt that they could absorb that 119 for many reasons. And I talked to him again today, and he still feels that way. When you have a school budget of $166 million, first of all, that's a budget that you can't manage down to the penny or even down to the $100,000. And at the end of the year, they always have money left. I'm not sure what they're giving back this year, but I would guess it's substantial. And so he felt he could manage with that cut. And he also has a number of dollars, which if he wants to lay out the numbers, it's significant amount of money. We are using that to reduce city costs on some of the building projects, without getting into a lot of detail. As soon as we have final clarity from the state on how it could be spent. But Mr. Donovan?
Yes, Dan Donovan, Chief Operating Officer for the school district. Yes, 119,000, it's really not. Put it this way, if I couldn't manage 119,000, I probably shouldn't be doing this job. But we have CARES money from the federal government. We have CARES 1 grant is 3.3 million. We have another $12 million grant, and coming soon, another $19 million grant. So we have lots of money to cover any issues related to. So,
There we go.
I feel very comfortable that, this 119,000 does not necessarily need to be added back simply because the other departments are requesting it.
If I could.
You have follow-up,
Yes, I
Alderwoman
would
Kelly?
love, I would love several follow-ups. Thank you. So my questions are around some of the positions that you guys were talking about hiring. I know that a lot of the CARES Fund acts cannot be used for staff. So with the budget as it is, will you still be able to get your board certified behavioral analyst, do the para increase because they are severely underpaid at $15 an hour, and get those 2 custodians that we need at the new facility for the preschool on Franklin Street?
Yeah, the reduction we would make in the current operating budget, we would not affect the BCBA. It would not affect the custodians to add to Franklin Street. It would not affect any positions at all. And we are able to hire more people using the CARES Act fund. We can't use those funds to give raises to existing people, but if we need to hire more staff to help, let's say, with social and emotional challenges our students may have, we could bring staff in for a year or 2 using these funds to help out in those areas.
Okay,
Alderwoman Kelly?
thank you. I just want to make a couple of points, and
Okay.
then we can discuss the motion that's on the floor here. I just want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of departments that are understaffed. The school is one of those as well. A number of years ago, they came to us for 9 ELL, we gave them 4. And now we are being mandated to make sure that we hit the right ELL in terms of training and bodies. So I think that we need to consider that too when they come to us, because they may not be running to your rescue as a heart attack, but our schools are just as important in terms of making sure that our future has a really important people behind them in terms of our educators. So I will say that, and I will say that if you're telling me that you don't need the 119,000, I will rescind my motion.
Yeah, and also I think, having had extensive discussions with the president of the Board of Ed, I believe their ELL, they have come to a shared cost agreement or something. Maybe you can, Mr. Donovan can explain it more on the ELL, and they've reached that agreement?
Yes, we've reached an agreement with the Department of Justice on the ELL investigation, and it is not requiring any more new staff. It is requiring a significant amount of training, which we're putting into the CARES Act funds, actually, for this coming school year, and a few other things, but they did not request that we need to add more staff at this point in time.
We're even looking at squeezing an extra classroom into fairgrounds so they can have smaller ELL groups. We're looking at the feasibility of that right now without any additional cost to the bond or anything else, because I didn't want Mr. Fredette to think I was coming back for more money.
Well, I definitely was concerned knowing that that was an area that we were going to need to look at and improve. If I could do one more follow-up.
Sure.
Mr. Donovan, the training that is happening for the ELL, the way I understand it, we will be using training days that we normally have to get our teachers all ELL certified. Is that correct?
It won't be all ELL certified per se, but they'll all receive the training.
Okay.
It won't necessarily result in a certification. But the goal with the ELL is to teach existing teachers the ELL skills. It's not to have a whole nother set of teachers that only do ELL. And I'm probably not the person to speak to you about ELL education, but it's using existing staff and teaching them so that they can include that in their everyday class.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I'm sure we can schedule a whole nother conversation on that.
And
Yes.
your desire on your motion?
I'll resend it.
All right.
The school says they don't need it,
Yes. I tried to figure out how narrow they have to manage to the end of the year, and it's certainly a lot of money left after than 100 and whatever it is. And only once in the history of the school, and we don't want to get into it, they had a problem.
I remember that quite well.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Are there any other motions relative to the budget? Seeing none, then the motion on the floor is to approve the, let me get the right page here. And I hope Mr. Griffin's been using his calculator over there. Is to approve R 21-142, the city budget for FY '22 in the amount of,
Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, CFO, $291,026,961.
you've
So
heard,
again, 291,026,961.
okay. All right, are there any discussions on the motion? Alderman Jette?
So, based on what the mayor and CFO Griffin said previously, I guess we really can't say what that is going to, what kind of a tax increase. I mean, you gave us a range of between 3% and 4%. I think the mayor said 3.6. I guess that was probably before these additions were made with the fire and the police. Do you have any idea where we stand on that?
He has a tricky little model that should come up with a,
John Griffin, CFO, slightly over 4%. So as the mayor said, 3.6, you add $660,000, slightly over 4%. But as Treasurer Forget always reminds me, a lot can happen between now and the September-October timeframe. We're anxiously awaiting, hopefully, all the restorations of the budgets that were short. I'm only kidding. But, there's a lot of work that's going on, but this is a good percentage to plan
Okay.
at this point. Thank you.
Could I follow up?
follow up?
So, I don't know if you, the mayor, or maybe, members of our delegation could answer this. I know that I think there was a meeting recently of the county delegation about the county budget. I heard that they were looking for like 17% increase. Was anything done at that meeting? Is it?
Mayor has the answer.
They were looking for a 13% increase. Now, I think as a result of actions taken by the commissioners, right? It's down to a 4% increase, although we're still arguing that there's $40 million coming to the county. They have a smaller budget than we have, so, this is like us getting $60 million a year, they're getting $40 million a year, and we're saying, well, look, the provision of services is an eligible expense, so you could provide services with some of the money and, make a flat tax increase or 2% or something. Why 4 when we've got all these problems? In any event, that's sort of where it is now, but the delegation, the executive committee of the delegation hasn't even met on it, have they?
Have they passed, have they?
It has been passed by the county, and it looks like it's going to add about a nickel to the taxes on a house, about $250,000. So although 4% sounds big, it really isn't when you spread it over the whole county.
Well, it's a 100 to 200,000 more than we originally projected, as far as Nashua's share. Pensions hitting the county too, actually. You think they're just getting, the pension's just getting us here now. Well, it's all the other cities and towns, but also they hit the county with increased pensions, which means our bill goes up. So it hit, you know, it reverberates in more than one place.
All set, Alderman Jette?
Yes, thank you.
Just a high point. Last year at budget time, at this very time, we were trying to keep everything under a 3% budget. And it came in significantly less because of all the great actions that took place between the passing of the aldermatic budget and the actual setting of the tax rate. Hopefully that can happen again, but, again, I think you could say that the tax increase on property tax this year, all due to the state. Not due to our local departments, who I know have all tried to keep it to the bare minimum as necessary to maintain the services that we need as a city to provide to the citizens and keep them safe.
And educated.
Any other comments on the motion on the floor? Alderwoman Kelly?
Yes, I'm gonna ask a tough one, so I'm interested in the piece of legislation that just came down from the state that would potentially reinstate our tax cap. And if we pass this budget, is it under what that tax cap was, and what would be the effects for next year?
Well, that doesn't go into effect for 60 days from passage, so doesn't apply to this year. Next year, I think that the legislation that was passed creates complications that the sponsors don't really realize. And we could get into that, but
Let's not.
it's a longer discussion right now than right now. But there were, at least as the legal department is advising us, there were a number of ordinances passed over the years to interpret the charter and how it should be applied. Most of those, the only ones that were passed recently, was just one change. Most of them were adopted, long ago. And as the legal department is advising us that the legislation wipes out all the interpretive language, not just the stuff that was, the one that was adopted recently had to do with part of the wastewater, but all of the interpretive language gets wiped out. So only the language of the charter remains. And the language of the charter was considered to be unworkable after the charter passed, after the thing passed, and that's why the interpreted language was sponsored by someone like Alderman T. Boone and was passed. So we're still trying to evaluate how this would apply without any of the interpretive language.
Okay.
I don't feel like I got my question answered.
So we don't know is the answer.
Cap that was in place previously, what would be the top line percentage increase that we could see?
Well, the number would be 1.7%, but the volatility will be extreme given, without the interpretive language, the volatility in the budget's going to be very great because an expenditure is any kind of capital expenditure. So the idea that only the debt payments count in the cap is probably not correct. And therefore, when the city spends $100 million on a school, that's an expenditure. So that year, the budget, the number goes up 100 million. Next year, it dips, it may dip 50 million. I mean, those are exaggerations, but I think what we should do is, give you a more thorough briefing once we've sort of studied it and, trying to figure out how it might apply.
Yeah, I think that would be well in
Right.
order for sure.
Right.
And if I may, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, just
Mr.
one.
Griffin.
I know this is kind of a couple of words, but we have a spending cap. We're a
Did I say
tax
tax?
cap. Yeah,
Sorry.
just for and a spending cap, the
I know
mayor and
the
I,
difference.
you could literally be, and if everything's included, you could get a grant of $50,000 and you can't even spend it because you might go over the cap. So that's what the mayor's talking about. Everything's included, so the toggling back and forth is gonna be quite difficult. You could be literally sitting in a Human Affairs Committee and saying, we can't afford that $1.7 million home loan because we can't appropriate it and spend it. So a lot of complications that I don't think, as the mayor said, the folks that would enjoy a spending cap would work it through. I actually went back when I first got here and I got the minutes of those initial meetings in 93, 94, and it was very complicated. So you almost take this overriding $600 million budget and you can't fit things in at the end of the day. So very difficult to give you an answer on the $291 million at this point. Thank you.
I appreciate it was a big question. That's why I said it's a big question. I'm just, thinking about the future of, we passed this year, what is it gonna look like next year if it does stand? And, what kinds of harder decisions might we have to make in a year?
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to approve the FY '22 budget for the city of Nashua in the amount of $291,026,961. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So we will not be having a meeting tomorrow evening. You have the night off. And I believe it's Thursday night is yes, the first. So on that evening, the first thing we have on the agenda is a public hearing on the petition for street off 44 Buck Meadow. Alderman Wilshire will be running that because I'm the petitioner because it's part of the school project. And the attorneys will explain that. And then we'll go into the approval of the budget. All right.
Great.
Oh, just so this is on, Thursday is July 1, right? Oh, okay,
Yes.
yeah. Sorry.
So if we don't approve the budget on July 1, then there's other issues that fall into place, since the fiscal year starts that day.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted to explain one thing that's bugged me for over 30 years is the county budget is different than a local budget. If the budget goes up 4%, that doesn't mean every community in the county will see a 4% increase. Some could see 10%, others could see 2%, because it's based on the equalized assessed value in your community each year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strange way of calculating it, but that's how they do it. So you never know until about September 30th exactly what your increase is going to be.
Yep.
Unfortunately. So it's not like when we pass a 2% increase, everybody goes up 2%. It's not like that in the county. All the counties, none of them work like that.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is general discussion. Anybody that wishes to make any comments? Seeing none, next item is public comment. Is there any members of the public that would like to speak? I don't see or hear anyone, so remarks by Alderman? Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. I just want to thank everyone for their hard work on the budget. It's been an interesting year. And I also wanted to make a statement regarding the Board of Education's meeting last week. They had members of Proud Boys show up. I strongly denounce this, and I understand there are many different opinions in our community, but that is completely unacceptable. And you bet if it happens here, there's going to be a conversation. So, thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to thank the work of this committee. It is a lot of hours we've been together, and I think we did great. I'd like to thank the mayor and CFO Griffin and Treasurer Fredette, working hard and give us a budget. I'd like to thank all division directors that did come before us. and give us their testimony and worked with us in trying to come with this. And I would also like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your expertise and guidance and directing us and finally getting it done. So thank you very much.
Yes, I am glad that this is through. I know we have one more meeting, but that won't be my meeting, so thank you all for participating in the budget process. I know it's a lot of work. I think I know the budget book probably by heart. I almost quoted something today by page and verse to Mr. Griffin. So I know I've seen the pages too many times. So, all right, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned at 9 o'clock.
I love not having roll call.